on Friday, and certainly early on there'll be a lot of thick fog across parts of eastern England, so that warning is still in place. Brighter skies across northern England, West Wales, some good spells of sunshine here and across Scotland, maybe the north coast of Northern Ireland seeing a bit of blue sky as well. And temperatures still generally a touch above average, but where that fog sticks around, we could really see temperatures struggling to get much above 3 or 4 Celsius, and that fog could well thicken up again on Friday evening and be a feature of the weather into the weekend. Clearer skies likely to persist across Scotland, which will allow, you can see there, hint of blue on the chart, a touch of frost to form here as we start Saturday morning. But again, much of central northern Scotland dry, fine and sunny. Could be some fog patches here. We're more likely to see them again across these eastern parts of England. Further south and west, some brightness, but many places just fairly cloudy but dry. Temperatures again, single figures for most, so a little bit down again. I'm feeling rather chilly, I suspect, particularly where it stays misty and murky. High pressure sticks around through Sunday and into the early part of next week, keeping things largely dry, but also things turning colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier. Mark White, live this hour from Dover, as more than 500 migrants cross the English Channel today in the bleak midwinter. As another respected clinical figure suggests that Omicron may be no worse than a severe cold, where is the spike in hospitalisations? As the Chancellor cuts short a trip to California to work on helping British business through this latest COVID emergency, we ask hospitality leaders how they plan to make it through to the new year. A leading American commentator says it's become impolite to ask about the state of Joe Biden's mental faculties. Is there a conspiracy of silence among mainstream media? We speak to a Brit in Washington. If you're a parent, do you read to your children? And if you do, what books, stories you enjoyed as a nipper perhaps? That's wrong, apparently. We'll share the woke titles that should now be bedtime reading. And the return of the Nativity, why 3 wise men, Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus, will not be obeying social distancing this Christmas. All that plus tonight's Brazier Angle and a Twitter poll that will get your dander up. But first, the headlines with Polly.
Good evening. The Metropolitan Police want to talk to two people who attended a Christmas gathering at the Tory party headquarters during lockdown last year. The force says it's in relation to alleged breaches of the coronavirus regulations. The former London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey quit as chair of London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee after the Mirror newspaper published a photograph of the event. Police are also looking into gatherings at Downing Street and the Department for Education in November and December 2020. Daily COVID cases in the UK have hit a record high for a second day. More than 88,300 were reported in the last 24 hours. That's 10,000 more than yesterday. It's the highest daily total since the pandemic began. And the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, is urging people to deprioritise certain social events ahead of Christmas to help prevent the spread of the virus. He's warning more records will be broken over the coming weeks as the Omicron variant surges in the UK.
Anybody who has something that really matters to them, concentrate on that thing and then build out from there, rather than just accepting every invitation and going to every bit of work in person. Clinical studies are showing that lots of people are getting reinfected with Omicron who previously had been vaccinated or had a combination of vaccines and natural infection. So it definitely is likely to bypass some of the ability to reduce infection.
Professor Chris Whitty speaking there. Well, British tourists and business travellers will be banned from entering France from Saturday because of the rise in Omicron cases in the UK. The French government's announced that only French nationals, their families and British citizens living in the country will be allowed in. They'll have to self-isolate for 7 days on entry, but can leave isolation after 48 hours if they receive a negative PCR test. Travel industry groups describe the move as a hammer blow to their Christmas season. The Bank of England has raised interest rates for the first time in 3 years. The increase from 0.1% to 0.25% follows a surge in the cost of living. 8 out of 9 committee members voted in favour of the vote. And as you've been watching on GB News throughout today, more than 500 people have been rescued from the English Channel so far today. Border Force and lifeboats have intercepted several small boats and inflatables carrying men, women and children. Migrants pushed past French police to make the journey to Dover as the weather improved. The authorities say rescues are ongoing tonight. You're right up to date. I'm back in an hour. Now back to Brazier.
Let's pick up straight away then, shall we, with that top story. Events in the English Channel today. More than 500 people, at least, have crossed the Channel in the bleak midwinter. Let's turn to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's been following proceedings there. Mark, this would have been unthinkable a year ago.
Yeah, it is just remarkable to think that here we are well into December now and 550 at least have crossed the English Channel into UK waters today. More than a dozen vessels intercepted by Border Force and also RNLI lifeboats out there. The last two incidents happening within the last couple of hours, Dover and Ramsgate lifeboats called out to the mid-channel because of boats that were reportedly in difficulty with up to 40 people on each of these small boats. They attended, of course, because Border Force are out of hours. They work up until, about 6 o'clock in the evening. Any calls really after that time are dealt with by the lifeboats, and any calls in the early hours of the morning are dealt with by the lifeboats. A Dover lifeboat, for instance, was out in the early hours of this morning dealing with the first of these migrant boats to be intercepted mid-channel. Well, this evening they're back out again, picking up that work that Border Force had been doing during the day and taking them ashore.
Mark, where does this take us in terms of projections for next year? We've talked about this before. Some people suggesting you're looking at a doubling, perhaps a tripling. The truth is we have no idea.
No, because there is a very lucrative model there now that the people traffickers, the criminal gangs, the organised crime networks are working towards, that is netting them millions of euros each week. And of course, it's also showing those who want to come to the UK that there is a very, risk, well, I'm not going to say risk-free, of course it's not, but a guaranteed route in terms of being able to get across the channel. As long as you can get into the water and you're determined that you're not going to be stopped by the French on that side, then you'll get to UK waters and into the hands of UK authorities. So as far as the business model is concerned, it is there. And what we've seen in the last few years is a tripling each year of the number of migrants who've come across in these small boats. It trebled last year, trebled the year before. So every reason to believe that it will at least treble again next year. Now, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is saying that they are trying with the new Borders and Immigration Bill to make this an unworkable model for the people traffickers, but I'm not sure that I see exactly how that is going to work, especially when you have the French authorities flat refusing the help of the British in terms of putting British Border Force personnel on the beaches of northern France. You remember, of course, a few weeks ago after that tragedy in which 27 people died, Emmanuel Macron slapped Boris Johnson down, said that no way is he going to have British authorities on French beaches, that they'll bolster their own defences and stop these boats launching in the first place. Well, today has been the first real test of that because of the weather conditions over the past 10 days or so. And what do we see? We see close to 600 migrants who've made that crossing today.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark White there. Well, another story about rising numbers, another record rise in the number of Omicron cases today, getting on for 90,000 in 24 hours. But as we've seen and we've been saying this week, what matters is the number ultimately of hospitalisations, and they're little change at this stage. It's too early to say whether that is part of an emerging picture the optimists are keen for us to paint of a variant which is 8 times more infectious than Delta, but considerably less lethal. Today, their hand was strengthened by the words of Professor Tim Spector, one of the leading clinical voices in the country when it comes to this sort of thing, who said that Omicron appears to produce a fairly mild illness from which people recover after about 5 days. Well, there was also news about the first reported UK fatality. We reported it earlier this week. The Prime Minister told us something about it. The death apparently involving a man in his 70s who had, we're told, refused a vaccination. Meanwhile, regardless of how much serious illness Omicron may or may not produce, the consequences of the spike in cases is really quite hard to ignore. France has banned all non-essential travel from the UK. There are question marks over the resilience of supply chains again as staff self-isolate. And Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has cut short a trip to California to return to Britain after criticism he was not doing enough to help businesses hit by COVID. Well, we'll discuss the impact on hospitality in just a moment, but first the epidemiological picture. And with me now is Professor George Lomonosov, a virologist from the John Innes Centre. Thank you so much for your time this evening. We do appreciate it. What are you making of the daily figures?
Well, it is a very sharp increase. And the worry is that the sort of doubling time is between 1 and 2 days now, which is considerably faster than the Delta variant, which we've been much more familiar. Also, there's a lot of concern about the R number, which is related, of course. Again, we're used to numbers, maybe 1.1, 1.2. This is estimated to be between 3 and 5. It's only an estimate because at the moment. So it is a much faster spreading variant. I don't think anyone thinks differently than that. What the consequences are a bit more debatable.
It's just interesting to hear the R number invoked again. We'd rather stop using it as a metric. It was ubiquitous at one time, wasn't it? And the idea we should be up to something as high as you suggest is a reminder of just how infectious Omicron is. But as we've been discussing all week, there is this open question remaining about to what extent it will result in actual hospitalisations and ultimately in greater mortality. evidence from South Africa, control for their different demographics there, suggests it may be a third less lethal in terms of its virulence compared to Delta. But that is still, when the caseload is so high, that's still the potential there for a great number of hospitalisations. We simply don't know at this stage.
I think that's unfortunately the case. And we probably won't really know, probably for about another 2 weeks, which is, now going to be sort of around early January time, New Year time, because there's inevitably a lag between number of cases and number of hospitalisations. And so, rather with sort of bated breath, hoping that the vaccination, the booster scheme, has an impact on it. A little bit of a caution that it does take about 10 days or so for the effect of the booster to become, fully worked up in the immune system. And therefore, it's not going to immediately have a fantastic impact on day one. So in the next week or so is going to be very critical on how this unfolds.
In terms of how the government approach this problem, we are in a sense seeing, it's quite an interesting feature of public behaviour in this, and to some degree we haven't seen it on this scale before, I don't think, this idea of lockdown by stealth. The government's not saying directly, at least the one in Westminster isn't peddling a particularly draconian message, not compared to what it's done before, for instance. But there are great numbers of the great British public out there who've decided, it seems to many of us, judging by the empty roads, certainly in London, that actually they're not going to take a chance.
Yeah, sort of effectively voting with their feet and staying at home. I suppose the problem, with a lockdown by stealth as compared to a mandated one is the issue of government help, which has been a big concern to the hospitality industry. Because if it's just people deciding not to go, the government can say, well, it's not up to us. That's purely a decision. So I think that's going to be interesting, whether the government come under pressure from the hospitality industry to actually announce that this is a requirement and therefore maybe find some way of giving financial support.
George Lomonosov, appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much. Well, schools are getting prepared to switch to online learning if they have to next term amid the increasing spread of Omicron. Some children are even being asked to take laptops home with them before Christmas in preparation. Official figures show over 200,000 students were out of school for COVID-related reasons in England this week. The government's also preparing to issue call to arms style letters to recently retired teachers who could return to schools to help ease the staff shortage, if that's what it gets to. Well, I'm joined by Christine Cunliffe, head teacher at LVS School in Ascot. Christine, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Do appreciate it. I'm guessing that, most schools actually have broken up now for Christmas. A lot of schools that haven't will do by the end of this week. Heads like you, I'm sure, will issue an almighty sigh of relief, but also some trepidation for the new year.
Yes, we do. I think we breathe a sigh of relief. We've got here to the end of term, but this is nothing this is not strange to us now, because last year at this time we were planning to test all the children on their return in January. So we're used to this. We're used to having to think on our feet and maybe taking a different direction. And I think, the teaching profession is well placed now to embrace any challenge that comes our way come January.
Your school has got kids right from primary, from 4 years old, all the way through to sixth form and 18. They're affected in different ways, aren't they, according to their ages?
Yeah, absolutely. The children have been out of proper school for about 18 months. So we are seeing some of those socialisation issues with children. So, for example, you had children who were barely into year 8 when suddenly they're back into year 10 and they're young adults. And that's very hard for them. It's hard growing up in normal times, but growing up when you've been away from your peers and normal school is exceptionally difficult. And then even with the younger ones as well, further down the school, it's things about playing with each other, being able to go out and know how to play games together, to tie our shoelaces, to get ready for PE, being away from mum and dad. So there's challenges all the way through at every age.
And there's a massive leadership challenge for people in your position, Christine, because in a sense you're facing in two directions, aren't you? Maybe more than two. You're facing at the pupils, at the sort of clients, the customers, as it were, the parents too. But you've also got all the people you've got to manage the teaching staff. And some of them will strike a very different pose from others. You'll be dealing with some teachers who are a bit more unionised, perhaps a bit more militant than others, a bit less biddable than some. It's quite a calculation you've got to make as to how you motivate people.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and as you say, everybody's going to come from it from a different page, from a different angle. But I think at the end of the day, we're here for the children, to provide a first-class education, whatever school you're in, to get those children into school and give them the best education that they could possibly have. And I think all teachers, at the end of the day, and head teachers, that's all they want. And so, you know, I think we've seen some really fabulous pulling together throughout the pandemic to just provide the best.
Christine, can I ask you a very direct question about exams? I mean, like many people, I've got a 16-year-old, 16, trying to remember, 16-year-old who's got some GCSE exams coming up, and a 17-year-old with A-levels this coming summer as well. They're both working very hard in the expectation they will be sitting down to sit exams. What do you think?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, we didn't see this coming, did we? We'd seen Omicron coming, but I think it's always been in the back of our heads, I think as head teachers and as teachers, that it's a possibility. It might not happen. And if it does happen, it might be a hybrid. So we're just waiting to find out what's going to happen. But this is, again, there's nothing new for children as well. So all I can say is my advice would be work hard. Don't take a day off. Just do your best first time, get that work done so that your teachers, if we have to give those grades again, we've got the evidence. So that would be my advice. And not to worry, because we're professionals, we're used to this. Pass all the stress over to us. You just work hard.
It's good advice. I'm not sure they'll take it. Christine, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
After the break, as Joe Biden signals his intention to serve a second term, there's an opinion piece in the New York Times today. It says mainstream media is ignoring the decline in his mental faculties. We'll discuss that.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello. Dry and cloudy for most today, and the next few days we'll see more of the same. We are going to see some thick fog patches, though, thickening up overnight, particularly over parts of eastern England. The largely dry weather, thanks to a chunky area of high pressure that's slowly moving in, pushing away these weather fronts to the north. They have been bringing some rain to Shetland during the day, but that's fizzling out. And as I say, most places are going to be dry. But the fog is thickening up once more this evening over parts of eastern England. There is a Met Office yellow warning in place. That fog likely to be dense and likely to stick around for much of Friday. Well, we keep clearing skies across northeast England and parts of Scotland. There will be a touch of frost, but generally a lot of cloud across the south, keeping the temperatures up here. Many places will be cloudy on Friday, and certainly early on there'll be a lot of thick fog across parts of eastern England, so that warning is still in place. Brighter skies across northern England, West Wales, some good spells of sunshine here and across Scotland, maybe the north coast of Northern Ireland seeing a bit of blue sky as well. And temperatures still generally a touch above average, but where that fog sticks around, we could really see temperatures struggling to get much above 3 or 4 Celsius, and that fog could well thicken up again on Friday evening and be a feature of the weather into the weekend. Clearer skies likely to persist across Scotland, which will allow, you can see there, hint of blue on the chart, a touch of frost to form here as we start Saturday morning. But again, much of central northern Scotland dry, fine and sunny. Could be some fog patches here. We're more likely to see them again across these eastern parts of England. Further south and west, some brightness, but many places just fairly cloudy but dry. Temperatures again, single figures for most, so a little bit down again and feeling rather chilly, I suspect, particularly where it stays misty and murky. High pressure sticks around through Sunday and into the early part of next week, keeping things largely dry, but also things turning colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Well, it seems to me our team is in real trouble. Look at this pair of warbirds. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping this week agreeing a new level of cooperation against the West, against us. Whatever else they are, these are two tyrants at the very top of their game, ruthless, energetic, and focused. Our team captain, the leader of the free world, is this man. Joe Biden, 79, but were he to serve a second term, potentially still president at 86. There you go, Joe. You have a little sleep. Is there a conspiracy of silence, almost a code of omerta, that is preventing candid discussion of what this might mean? Well, not anymore. In a blistering piece for the flagship organ of liberal America, columnist Bret Stephens wrote this in today's New York Times. It's now considered horrible manners, he said, to raise concerns about Biden's age and health, as if doing so can only play into Trump's hands, as if the president's well-being is nobody's business but his own, as if accusations of ageism and a giant shushing sound from media elites can keep the issue off the public mind. Is he right? Is the mainstream media leery of questioning Biden's mental faculties for fear of boosting Trump? Almost certainly. Are they also worried about sounding ageist? Well, that's not as daft as it sounds. This morning we read, not in the New York Times, but the Times of London, how an employment tribunal has ruled that it's discriminatory to ask someone in their 60s when they plan to retire. But it's one thing for an office worker in his 60s to be facing ageism, that's wrong, But it's entirely acceptable, necessary indeed, to ask a man about to turn 80 when he plans to retire, Not just any man, but the most powerful, democratically elected person in the world. This stuff really matters. I mentioned the Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping a moment ago. The West is now belatedly pivoting to recognise the threat he poses. And yet, when it came to unveiling the Australia, UK and US Defence Pact designed to counter Beijing recently, President Biden couldn't even remember the name of Australia's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison.
Thank you, Boris. And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister. And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister.
It's vital we talk about this because the decline in acuity can be quick. Our former Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, was a woman with a ferocious intellect until dementia struck. According to one cabinet colleague, Ken Clarke, small signs, he says, of memory loss may have started in her final year in office, perhaps. If he's right, it was a mercy she was forced from number 10 when she was. We'll talk about that in a moment. But nobody is forcing Joe Biden from the White House. Quite the contrary. In the absence of a viable democratic alternative and given the uselessness of his vice president, the West may be stuck with his faltering leadership for most of this decade. Can anything be done? Perhaps the president ought to ask the Pope, who he met at the Vatican a few weeks ago. As a Catholic, President Biden will know what a revolutionary step the pontiff who came before Francis, Benedict, took in stepping down. It simply isn't done. Traditionally, popes died in office, even if that meant, as it did with Pope John Paul II, that the world's 1.3 billion Catholics were left with a leader struck down with Parkinson's disease. If the Vatican, a nearly 2,000-year-old institution which still conducts official business in Latin, can move with the times, why can't the Democratic Party? But it can't, you see. Last month, the White House confirmed Biden will run again. Should he win, and incumbents rarely lose, he'll be closer to 90 than 80 come the end of his presidency. That will be 2028. Coincidentally, the same year China's economy is predicted to overtake America's. Anyone who thinks a world where communist China is top dog will be hunky-dory needs their head examining. But then so does Joe Biden, and we all need to know the results. That's the Brazier Angle. Joined now by former aide to Margaret Thatcher and now director at the Heritage Foundation, Niall Gardner. Niall, thanks ever so much for joining us. You know far more than most what it was like to witness somebody who had such a brain behind them, Oxford educated, had been a chemist, was a scientist, went through the law, became an MP, minister, prime minister, 3 terms, all the rest of it, a political legend, and yet there was a decline of mental acuity which did set in fairly rapidly.
Well, I think with Margaret Thatcher, her decline set in at a much later stage, well after she had left Downing Street. And I have to say that, you know, Margaret Thatcher's intellect, her ferocious intellect, her tremendous intelligence, her knowledge of the briefing papers and all the policy issues was absolutely unrivaled. And there's really no comparison, in my view, between a figure like Margaret Thatcher, a towering intellect, and Joe Biden, the present leader of the United States, the leader of the free world. And as you showed in your video earlier today, Colin, you know, I think with Joe Biden, literally, he's sleeping from behind. And that footage was from the COP26 summit in Glasgow. And you had the shot there, the president literally, you know, falling asleep at a global summit. And I have to say that, you know, Margaret Thatcher, in every respect, was a leader in a totally different league to Joe Biden. But the reality is, of course, here in the United States, you still have a dominant liberal media that doesn't ask the kinds of questions that need to be asked with regard to Biden. He clearly is in a state, I think, of mental decline due to his age, but also Joe Biden is increasingly a hostage, I think, to the far left of the Democratic Party, and that's a real issue here. I think more serious than his sort of mental decline is definitely the dangerous policies that the Biden presidency is advancing. This is a president who has really surrendered, in many respects, to the far left in the United States, and that's a real concern not only for America but for the entire free world as well.
We'll come on to some of those policies in a second, Niall. And by the way, I think you're right to correct me. And that's an odious comparison that I've made there between Lady Thatcher as was, and, you know, in office, her appetite for hard work, her attention to detail, her willingness to sit up into the small hours with the red boxes was unparalleled almost. There is no comparison, of course. But I just wonder sometimes whether we are a little harsh on Joe Biden. I mean, you know, the clip where we see him at COP, nodding off. I mean, OK, he'd been in Europe for a bit. I was going to say we should be kinder to him. Jet lag, maybe. There was another clip I saw today when he was, even the Scott Morrison clip. Actually, sort of, yes, he forgets, but then he thinks, you know, the synapses are firing quickly enough for him to make light of it, kind of.
Yeah, I think, you know, with Biden, perhaps he could be forgiven for falling asleep at, you know, COP26, which is an absolutely horribly boring summit. But, you know, when you forget the name of the Australian Prime Minister and when you don't really have a grasp of a lot of key foreign policy issues, and the reality is the Chinese and the Russians are taking full advantage of their perceived weakness of the US president. They sense a presidency in crisis, a hugely unpopular president. He's scraping, you know, barely 40% in the opinion polls. And, you know, this is a presidency that is sinking at a very, very rapid pace. And the enemies of the free world really are taking full advantage of that, as we're seeing on the Russian front. Huge numbers of Russian forces massing on the Ukraine border right now. The Chinese issuing all sorts of threats against Taiwan. And you know, across the world, I think the enemies of freedom are questioning American leadership. They see a superpower in decline, especially in the wake of the absolutely disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal. And so, you know, Joe Biden really is sowing the seeds of the decline of the greatest superpower the world has ever seen. And that's an extremely dangerous situation here. And without a doubt, I mean, the likes of Vladimir Putin fully understand this, and they're taking full advantage of what they see as tremendous American weakness, a lack of leadership. And it doesn't help, of course, when Joe Biden, falls asleep on the international stage or can't remember the names of foreign leaders. So, this is a United States that is completely rudderless at the moment. Huge domestic problems, soaring inflation, a massive border crisis on the southern border. You've got widespread looting in stores in California, rising lawlessness across cities, especially wherever the Democrats are in control. So this is a superpower in crisis right now, and Joe Biden isn't the man to be dealing with this.
And that's why, Niall, I was so keen to juxtapose those pictures of these two really tough nuts, hard-nosed political calculators, deeply Machiavellian, deeply controlling, deeply successful individuals, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, brokering between each other, in a sense, how they are going to deal with the West, a West led, not just a White House led by Joe Biden, but as you say, the leader of the free world, the person, in a sense, we all look to in the West for leadership. And the optics are terrible. It just looks like you can almost see the baton of global leadership passing from this tired leader in the White House right now to these two hungry, at least notionally, communist leaders in Russia and China.
Yeah, I think that, without a doubt, I think the free world is facing the biggest, crisis of our time here when the United States is in free fall on the international stage. And the US really has to reverse course. We need to have strong, bold, conservative leadership in America that is willing to stand up for the United States, that is willing to bring together all of the allies of the United States. And without a doubt, I think Joe Biden has significantly weakened the NATO alliance through his actions over Afghanistan. He's also sent all sorts of weak signals to Putin with regard to Ukraine, calling for a NATO-Russia summit that only involves a small number of NATO countries. And of course, this is being condemned by our allies in Eastern and Central Europe. We need to have a president who actually believes in American leadership on the world stage who's willing to lead the free world against the forces of evil and tyranny. And clearly, I mean, Joe Biden's a million miles away from that, and Kamala Harris as vice president is even worse in so many respects. And so I think that, America badly needs the kind of Reagan-style leadership that we saw decades ago, the kind of Reagan-Thatcher-style leadership. And I think Brexit Britain has an important role to play in terms of advancing strong leadership on the world stage at the moment, because there's an absence of American leadership at this time. Britain must also lead. And it's important that the special relationship always be at the very heart, I think, of the leadership of the free world. But you have a US president who is also knifing Britain in the back as well, throwing US allies under the bus, and a president who's literally sleepwalking into disaster here. And Joe Biden, I have to say, his presidency is an absolute catastrophe for the United States, a catastrophe for the free world, and for the enemies of the free world. They are celebrating right now.
As ever. Niall, thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Well, what with the childcare costs, the broken sleep, turning out at all hours to pick them up, it sometimes feels like there aren't really many perks to parenting, but there's one. The opportunity to imprint on a young mind all that we know, all that we've loved, and all that we've read. According to the Oxford University Press, 2/3 of parents choose books they were read to as children in turn to read to their offspring. Well, as surveys go, that's one of the least surprising polling results we've seen for some time. But what is surprising, at least to this parent, is what the publishers among the dreamy spires of Oxford University think this might mean. They think it suggests a certain parental narrow-mindedness. So rather than reading The Hobbit to my children because I enjoyed reading it myself as a kid, I ought to be reading something a little more contemporary and edgy. Dare we say something even a little bit woke. So it is that the Oxford University Press suggests that no childhood should now be complete without a bedtime reading list that includes Max Takes a Stand by Tim Allman. It's about a child trying to save the planet, of course. And The Pirate Mums by Jodie Lancet Grant, about a boy with two mothers. With me now, former GCSE and A-level examiner in English literature and classical studies for nearly 30 years, Anis Garfield. Anis Garfield, thanks ever so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. What do you make of this new reading list from the Oxford University Press? Is it woke? Does it matter?
It's essential that children are read to and read themselves. What do you say you read The Hobbit? You read The Hobbit to your children? Do you know what I did, Anis? I managed to get through the entire Fellowship of the Ring, the first. It was about 450 pages. And it was purgatory, sitting there, in a for you or your children?
For me. Well, probably for them too. But the point is, I shouldn't think I'd have, done it night after night after night, reading it to them, skipping the sort of dwarf songs, which are unsingable. Had I not read the book myself, if it was just another piece of agitprop or social engineering that I'd find tremendously dull, I don't think I'd have read it to them.
I think it's your enthusiasm for it that transferred itself to your children, whereas the book you've just quoted as the modern thing, can't that be left to their schools and contemporaries and life, whereas they would miss out on so much? What else besides The Hobbit did you read to yours? And what age are we talking about?
Well, where do you want to begin? There are 6 of them. We haven't got time to go through all their, their reading habits, but they all still read, and I'm sure we probably share the view. We probably share the view that it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And I just wonder during, we've had a couple of getting on for what feels like a couple of years now of COVID. At times, quite an intense lockdown. There's an opportunity within that. There has been an opportunity within that for children to read off syllabus, to really get the reading bug. And obviously parents have had a role to play in that.
Did you find that a boy liked a different thing from a girl in your children?
I'll answer that question, and I'll remind you, Anis, this is my interview. I get to ask the questions. Are you auditioning?
Me be able to ask you.
Well, actually, yes. I did up to a point.
I'll tell you then that the William books, I didn't read them anything like Martin Jarvis does on the radio, but they were very manageable. And if our children and now my grandchildren don't get introduced to those wonderful traditional stories, books of old, they never will they? And it's so good for their language, for their writing themselves, for their imagination.
I totally agree.
Curiously, my daughter, like William, more than anything. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
We can all hear you very clearly. We've just got time for 30 more seconds, Anis Garfield. And
What I would like to say, please, Mr. Brazier, is that in the Times, this article we're meant to be discussing, it classes Enid Blyton among the classics. And she's about as classic an author as a bag of jelly babies, wouldn't you think? It's very easy to swallow, Noddy and big ears. Noddy is an educational, subnormal nitwit, as defined by a psychiatrist was asked to do a profile of big ears for a magazine, and it didn't come out in a very complimentary way. What did he call him? An educationally subnormal nit. And it's a pity to consign our children to thinking Enid Blyton is a classic. Hugely influenced. She was a publishing phenomenon because she had her eye on what sold and she knew what was popular. But my mother wouldn't allow us to read Enid Blyton.
She wasn't Jane Austen. She wasn't Jane Eyre. That's clear. Anis Garfield, we've got to leave it there. But really appreciate your contribution. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
After the break, it flies at 62 miles a second and can withstand heat that would almost melt metal. Another amazing story of human ingenuity coming up.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, America's space agency still has the power to impress. It's aimed a spaceship at the sun, travelling at 62 miles per second and capable of withstanding temperatures almost hot enough to make metal molten. It's the Parker Solar Probe. It actually made its unprecedented flight through the sun's corona in April, but data has only recently been returned to Earth. It's a remarkable mission and a journey of discovery. With us to ponder on it, the author and space expert, Dr. David Whitehouse. David, thanks ever so much for joining us. I'm guessing you're very impressed with this one.
Very impressed. To get to within 8 million miles of the solar surface. And as for comparison, the Earth is 93 million miles away from from the sun, so it's less than 10% of our distance, to dip into the actual atmosphere of the sun. I mean, we are in the influence of the sun, not only from its radiation, but from the material it throws out into the solar system. But this actually got into the corona, which is the hot outer atmosphere of the sun, which is full of mysteries, which is a place we observe and we do not fully understand. To get this probe in there, to let it survive behind its heat shield, to get it in and out of this region several times in a few hours, and for it to go back in a few years' time when its trajectory takes it even closer, is truly remarkable, because this is an environment we have never been to before and contains many mysteries about how our star works.
I've got to be honest, David, it's enough of a mystery to me just to read how they managed to create this composite shield behind which the gubbins were protected. I mean, it was only sort of, I read, about 30 degrees Celsius behind the shield, in front of the shield. Well, pick a figure, any figure.
It's absolutely remarkable, because they have to keep the instruments behind the shield, because if ever the instruments come into line of sight of the solar surface for more than a few seconds, then they are fried, they are unusable. And so to have this thing 100 million miles away, plus orbiting the sun, going close to the sun, going out to the orbit of Venus, and then dipping back in, the fastest spacecraft ever put into space, to control this so finely, to keep the instruments behind the sun shield, is a tour de force of spacecraft engineering, let alone the physics we're learning, because we rely on the sun to keep us alive, not only for its radiation, but also the material it throws out from the surface affects us in terms of communications, in terms of space weather. So the more we understand about what's going on there, the better it is not only for science, but for our daily lives. And this instrument is, as we said, a tour de force of getting into this harsh environment and getting the measurements out.
A tour de force, and just as you mentioned, the speed of the thing. I mean, why is it going so quickly?
The thing is about getting towards the inner solar system from the Earth is that actually it's quite difficult. It's probably easier to get to the planets Jupiter and Saturn, which are much further out. To get into an interior orbit, you have to actually go very fast indeed. So not only has the spacecraft be launched by a rocket that propels it very quickly as it leaves the Earth, but it also has to do several orbits of the sun, several close encounters with Venus, in order to get extra gravitational kicks to enable it to go down into the solar atmosphere and then back out again really quickly. Because if this probe, the Parker probe, actually stayed in the inner atmosphere, it wouldn't last very long. So it has to go in and get in quick, make the measurements, get out quick, send them back a few months later when the geometry is right for transmitting back, and then prepare for the next in-out quick. And the next dramatic one is in 2025, when actually it will go twice as close to the surface of the sun, 4 million miles. And that is, as you say, truly remarkable, because there are mysteries of matter around the sun, particularly the coronal atmosphere of the sun. It's 1,000,000 degrees hot, it's very thin, but it overlays the surface of the sun, which is only 6,000 degrees. And that shouldn't happen. That's a strange phenomenon to happen, something very hot next to something very cold. It doesn't work. Nature doesn't work that way. Heat doesn't flow in that direction. So there's something going on there we need to find out about, and that's what this probe will help us ask.
It's a lovely idea, 6,000 degrees being quite cold, but we know what you mean.
It is.
David Whitehouse, thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Now, the thing about Christmas traditions is that they evolve. Take the films that we watch. One of certainly my proudest Christmas achievements has been to make the children whose attachment to black and white films is not strong into fans of this one, that Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart. However, some of you would have been surprised, I think, by quite how many of my colleagues here looked blankly when I mentioned It's a Wonderful Life. Dear, oh dear. Say Christmas films to most of them, and you'd likely be taken aback by quite how many of these Philistines respond with the words "Die Hard," as in the Bruce Willis movie involving, yes, an exploding skyscraper. Well, here's another change. Anyone driving through a British suburb this year can't fail to notice how the fashion for household illuminations has really caught on. But as new traditions wax, old traditions wane. Can't prove it, but I suspect the nativity scene might be less popular than it was. We've tried to arrest that decline in our own, when I say small, I mean really small way. I think we can pick it up. This pathetic effort is our contribution to the nativity scene. Hang on, don't leave it yet. I mean, it's literally put together thus. But there you go, it's a thought that counts. Thank goodness then for the Christmas fanatics of Alicante in Spain, who have just broken the world record for the largest ever nativity scene. And indeed, the city of Naples, in Italy, where the nativity scene itself has moved with the times. 3 wise men bearing gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh, but also, it feels a bit sacrilegious, COVID passports. Joining me, the director of Affinity Gospel Churches in Partnership, that's Graham Nichols. Graham, thanks for joining us. Do you have a nativity scene? And if so, why not?
I didn't know I was going to get asked that question. I'm a parent of grown-up children. I don't think I do have a nativity scene in my house, even though I'm a church leader. So you've caught me out there. I'm not a great fan of them, to be honest. But I don't think they're terrible. I'm just not a great fan of them. But I think Christmas is complicated, isn't it? It's an overlay of traditions, some of which have nothing to do with the birth of Jesus, but which are good in and of themselves, whether it's films or other sort of family traditions or other things we associate with Christmas. And then there's this kind of backstory, which we're not quite sure whether a lot of us believe or not, but it's a good story about this baby being born who is the Son of God, who will be the Saviour of the world. And I think whether you're a Christian or not, kind of putting these things together. And as a Christian, you're trying to move away from the mythology towards the truth. And as perhaps someone who's not perhaps interested in the Christian faith, you're more interested in the traditions or the feeling about it. So it's a funny old festival for Christians, I would say, Christmas.
It varies a little bit according to which flavour of Christianity you are. I mean, as a Catholic, used to that scene of midnight mass, where the people who'd been to the pub piled in some numbers, and it would really irritate. Sometimes it didn't really irritate the priest, but certainly really irritate those people who would turn out, every week, every Sunday or Saturday evening to go to mass. That would really bother them. Does it bother you, or do you have an equivalent in your church?
I'm not sure. We don't have an equivalent of midnight mass. We welcome everyone who comes into a church just because it's Christmas, because we're excited about the news about the birth of Jesus. We think it's a real historical event. We think there really were wise men, there really were shepherds, there really was this baby born, there really was the virgin birth. So actually, as long as they're not disruptive, we don't mind anyone coming into any of our services in any of our churches and hearing something of it. Some just like the kind of nativity, child-friendly stuff, but some do kind of want to engage with not just the carols, but the kind of the engaging with, is it true or isn't it? Is it kind of mythology or is it history? So we're very, very open to anyone showing up, particularly this year with COVID and all the people's worries. We'll be glad if anyone comes through the doors.
Graham, I think that's probably going to be quite a widely shared view by many clergymen and women this year, if they're allowed to even open their doors. And many of them, I'm sure, will be wearing masks, heaven forfend. Graham, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Do get a nativity scene down from the loft. Even the old kids might enjoy it. Graham, thanks very much indeed. I think we're meant to talk about our Twitter poll at this stage, but I can't help feeling, no, don't look. They can look at that online. Let's have a look again at our magnificent nativity scene here in the studio. There it is, with a number of moving parts. And we'll say thank you to Julia, our producer, who's heading off to pastures new. Dan Wootton is next.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello, dry and cloudy for most today, and the next few days we'll see more of the same. We are going to see some thick fog patches though, thickening up overnight, particularly over parts of eastern England. The largely dry weather thanks to a chunky area of high pressure that's slowly moving in, pushing away these weather fronts to the north. They have been bringing some rain to Shetland during the day, but that's fizzling out, and as I say, most places are going to be dry. But the fog is thickening up once more this evening over parts of eastern England. There is a Met Office yellow warning in place. That fog likely to be dense and likely to